What was your first impression when you met Vladimir Putin for the interview?
I thought he seemed nervous. And I was very surprised by that. And I thought he seemed like someone who'd overthought it a little bit, who had a plan. And I don't think that's the right way to go into any interview. My strong sense, having done a lot of them for a long time, is that it's better to know what you think, to say, as much as you can, honestly, so you don't get confused by your own lies, and just to be yourself. And I thought that he went into it like an overprepared student, and I kept thinking, why is he nervous? But I guess because he thought a lot of people were going to see it.
But he was also probably prepared to give you a full lesson in history, as he did.
Well, I was totally shocked by that and very annoyed because I thought he was filibustering. I thought he would. I mean, I asked him, as I usually do, the most obvious, dumbest question ever, which is, why'd you do this? And he had said in a speech that I think is worth reading. I don't speak Russian, so I haven't heard it in the original, but he had said at the moment of the beginning of the war, he had given this address to Russians in which he explained to the fullest extent we have seen so far why he was doing this. And he said in that speech, I fear that NATO, the West, the United States, the Biden administration will preemptively attack us. And I thought, well, that's interesting. I mean, I can't evaluate whether that's a fear rooted in reality or one rooted in paranoia, but I thought, that's an answer right there. And so I alluded to that in my question, and rather than answering it, he went off on this long, from my perspective, kind of tiresome, sort of greatest hits of Russian history. And the implication, I thought, was, well, Ukraine is ours, or Eastern Ukraine is ours already. And I thought he was doing that to avoid answering the question. So, the last thing you want when you're interviewing someone is to get rolled. And I didn't want to be rolled. So I, a couple of times, interrupted him politely, I thought, but he wasn't having it. And then I thought, you know what? I'm not here to prove that I'm a great interviewer. It's kind of not about me. I want to know who this guy is. I think a Western audience, a global audience, has a right to know more about the guy. And so just let him talk, because it's not, I don't feel like my reputation's on the line. People have already drawn conclusions about me, I suppose, to the extent they have. I'm not interested really in those conclusions anyway. So just let him talk. And so I calmed down and just let him talk. And in retrospect, I thought that was really, really interesting. Whether you agree with it or not, or whether you think it's relevant to the war in Ukraine or not, that was his answer. And so it's inherently significant.
Well, you said he was nervous. Were you nervous? Were you afraid? This is Vladimir Putin.
Well, I wasn't afraid at all. And I wasn't nervous at all.
Did you drink tea beforehand?
No, I did my normal regimen of nicotine pouches and coffee. Mm-hmm. No, I'm not a tea drinker. I tried not to eat, all the sweets they put in front of us, which is that is my weakness, is eating crap. But you eat a lot of sugar before, as you know, before an interview, and it does dull you. So I successfully resisted that. But I wasn't nervous. I wasn't nervous the whole time I was there. Why would I be? I'm 54. My kids are grown. I believe in God. I'm almost never nervous. But no, I wasn't nervous. I was just interested. I mean, I'm interested in Soviet history. I studied it in college. I've read about it my entire life. My dad, worked in the Cold War. It was a constant topic of conversation. And so to be in the Kremlin, in a room where Stalin made decisions, either wartime decisions or decisions about murdering his own population, I just couldn't get over it. We were in Molotov's old office. So for me, I was just blown away by that. I thought I knew a lot about Russia. It turns out I knew a lot about the Soviet period, the 1937 purge trials, the famine in Ukraine. Like, I knew a fair amount about that, but I really knew nothing about contemporary Russia, less than I thought I did, it turned out. And, but yeah, I was just blown away by where we were. And that's kind of one of the main drivers at this stage in my life of it, that's why I do what I do, is because I'm interested in stuff and I want to see as much as I can and try and draw conclusions from it to the extent I can. So I was very much caught up in that, but no, I wasn't nervous. I didn't think he was going to kill me or something. And I'm not particularly afraid of that anyway. So
not afraid of dying.
Not really. No. I mean, again, it's it's an age and stage in life thing. I mean, I've 4 children, so there were times when they were little where I was terrified of dying, because if I died, it would have huge consequences. But no, I mean, at this point, I don't want to die. I'm really enjoying my life, but I've been with the same girl for 40 years. And I have 4 children who I'm extremely close to. Well, now 5, a daughter-in-law. And I love them all. I'm really close to them. I tell them I love them every day. I've had a really interesting life.
What was the goal? Just linger on that. What was the goal for the interview? Like, how were you thinking about it? What would success be like in your head leading into it?
To bring more information.
Just information.
To the public. Yeah, that's it. I mean, I have really strong feelings about what's happening not just in Ukraine or Russia, but around the world. I think the world is resetting to the grave disadvantage of the United States. I don't think most Americans are aware of that at all. And so that's my view, and I've stated it many times because it's sincere. But my goal was to have more information brought to the West so people could make their own decisions about whether this is a good idea. I mean, I guess I reject the whole premise of the war in Ukraine from the American perspective, which is, a tiny group of dumb people in Washington has decided to do this for reasons they won't really explain. And you don't have a role in it at all as an American citizen, as the person who's paying for it, whose children might be drafted to fight it. Just shut up and obey. I just reject that completely. I guess I'm a child of a different era. I'm a child of participatory democracy to some extent, where your opinion as a citizen is not irrelevant. And so I'm just, and I guess the level of lying about it was starting to drive me crazy. And I've said, and I will say again, I am not an expert on the region or really any region other than, say, Western Maine. I just don't, I'm not Russian. And, but it was obvious to me that we were being lied to in ways that were it was crazy, the scale of the lies. And I'll give you one example. The idea that Ukraine would inevitably win this war. Now, victory was never, as it never is, defined precisely. Nothing is ever defined precisely, which is always a tell that there's deception at the heart of the claim. But Ukraine's on the verge of winning. Well, I don't know. I mean, I'm hardly a tactician or a military expert. For the 5th time, I'm not an expert on Russia or Ukraine. I just look at Wikipedia. Russia has 100 million more people than Ukraine, 100 million. It has much deeper industrial capacity, war material capacity than all of NATO combined. For example, Russia is turning out artillery shells, which are significant in a ground war, at a ratio of 7-1 compared to all NATO countries combined. That's all of Europe. Russia is producing 7 times the artillery shells as all of Europe combined? What? That's an amazing fact. And it turns out to be a really significant fact. In fact, the significant fact. But if you ask your average person in this country, even a fairly well-informed person of good faith who's just trying to understand what's going on, who's going to win this war? Well, Ukraine's going to win. They're on the right side. And they think that because our media, who really just do serve the interests of the U.S. government, period, they are state media in that sense, have told them that for over 2 years. And I was in Hungary last summer talking to the prime minister, Viktor Orban, who's whatever you think of him, is a very smart guy, like smart on a scale that we're not used to in our leaders. And I said to him off camera, so is Ukraine going to win? And he looked at me like I was deranged, or I was congenitally, deficient. Are they going to win? No, of course they can't win. It's tiny compared to Russia. Russia has a wartime economy. Ukraine doesn't really have an economy. No, look at the populations. He was looked at me like I was stupid. And I said to him, I think most Americans believe that because NBC News and CNN and all the news channels, all of them tell them that because it's framed exclusively in moral terms and it's Churchill versus Hitler. And of course, Churchill's going to prevail in the end. And it's just so dishonest that it doesn't even matter what I want to happen or what I think ought to happen. That's a distortion of what is happening. And if I have any job at all, which I sort of don't actually at this point, but if I do have a job, it's to just try to be honest. And that's a lie.
There is a more nuanced discussion about what winning might look like. You're
for
right.
Sure.
A nuanced discussion is not being had, but it is possible for Ukraine to quote unquote win with the help of the United States.
I guess that conversation needs to begin by defining terms. And the key term is win. What does that mean?
Peace, a ceasefire, who owns which land.
Yes.
Coming to the table with, as you call the parent, the United States.
Yes.
Putting leverage on the negotiation to make sure there's a fairness.
Amen. Well, of course, and I should just restate this. I am not emotionally involved in this. I'm American in every sense, and my only interest is in America. I'm not leaving ever. And so I'm looking at this purely from our perspective, what's good for us. But also as a human being, as a Christian, I mean, I hate war, and anybody who doesn't hate war shouldn't have power, in my opinion. So I agree with that definition vehemently. A victory is like not killing an entire generation of your population. It's not being completely destroyed to be eaten up by BlackRock or whatever comes next for them. So yeah, we were close to that a year and a half ago. And the Biden administration dispatched Boris Johnson, the briefly prime minister of the UK, to stop it and to say to Zelensky, who I feel sorry for, by the way, because he's caught between these forces that are bigger than he is, to say, no, you cannot come to any terms with Russia. And the result of that has not been a Ukrainian victory. It's just been more dead Ukrainians and a lot of profit for the West. It's a moral crime, in my opinion. And I tried to ask Boris Johnson about it, because why wouldn't I? After he denounced me as a tool of the Kremlin or something. And he demanded $1 million to talk to me.
Wow.
And this just happened last week. And by the way, in writing too, I'm not making this. I'm not
just
making
for
this
the
up.
record, you demanded $1 million from me to talk to me today.
I did, and you paid. No, I'm of course kidding. But and I said to his guy, I said, I just interviewed Putin, who was widely recognized as a bad guy, and he did it for free. He didn't demand $1 million. He wasn't in this for profit. Like, are you telling me that Boris Johnson is sleazier than Vladimir Putin? And of course, that is the message. And so I guess these are really, it's not just about Boris Johnson being a sad, rapacious fraud, which he is obviously, but it's about like the future of the West and the future of Ukraine, this country that purportedly we care so much about. All these people are dying, and like, what is the end game? It's also deranged that I didn't imagine and don't imagine that I could like add anything very meaningful to the conversation, because I'm not a genius, okay? But I felt like I could, at the very least, puncture some of the lies, and that's an inherent good.
Vladimir Putin, after the interview, said that he wasn't fully satisfied because you weren't aggressive enough. You didn't ask sharp enough questions. First of all, what do you think about him saying that?
I don't even understand it. I guess it does seem like the one Putin statement that Western media take at face value. Everything else Putin says is a lie, except his criticism of me, which is true. But I mean, I have no idea what he meant by that. I can only tell you what my goal was, as I've suggested, was not to make it about me. I watched, he hasn't done any interviews of any kind for years. But the last interview he did with an English-speaking reporter, Western media reporter, was like many of the other interviews he'd done with Western media reporters. Mike Wallace's son did an interview with him that was of the same variety, and it was all about him. I'm a good person, you're a bad person. And I just feel like that's the most tiresome, fruitless kind of interview. It's not about me. I don't think I'm an especially good person. I've definitely never claimed to be. But people can make their own judgments. And again, the only judgments that I care about are my wife and children and God. So I'm just not interested in proving I'm a good person. And I just want to hear from him. And I had a lot of, you should see, I almost never write questions down, but I did in this case, because I had I had 3 years to think about it as I was trying to book the interview, which I did myself. But it was all about internal Russian politics and Navalny. And I had a lot of, I thought, really good questions. And then at the last second, and you make these decisions, as you know, since you interview people a lot, often you make them on the fly. And I thought, no, I want to talk about the things that haven't been talked about and that I think matter in a world historic sense. And the number one among those, of course, is the war and what it means for the world. And so I stuck to that. I could answer. I did ask about Gershkovich, who I felt sorry for, and I wanted Putin to release him to me, and I was offended that he didn't. I thought his rationale was absurd. Well, we want to trade him for someone. I said, well, doesn't that make him a hostage? Which of course it does. But other than that, I really wanted to keep it to the things that I think matter most. People can judge whether I did a good job or not, but that was my decision.
In the moment, what was your gut? Did you want to ask some tough questions as follow-ups? on certain topics?
I don't know what it would mean to ask a tough question.
Clarifying questions, I suppose they would.
I guess. I just wanted him to talk. I just wanted to hear his perspective. Again, I've probably asked more asshole questions than like any living American.
Sure.
I'm, as has been noted correctly, I'm a dick by my nature. And so I just feel at this stage of my life, I didn't need to prove that I could, like, Vladimir Putin, answer the question.
Sure,
It's
for
okay.
sure.
I think if I had been, 34 instead of 54, I definitely would have done that, because I would have thought this is really about me and I need to prove myself. And also, no, I just, there's a war going on that is wrecking the U.S. economy in a way and at a scale people do not understand. The U.S. dollar is going away. That was, of course, inevitable ultimately, because everything dies, including currencies. But that process of death has been accelerated exponentially by the behavior of the Biden administration and the U.S. Congress, particularly the sanctions. And people don't understand what the ramifications of that are. The ramifications are poverty in the United States. Okay. So I just wanted to get to that because I'm coming at this from not a global perspective. I'm coming at it from an American perspective.